Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Samantha Shea. I'm the Head of Policy Insight and Engagement at Gemserv. We're the delivery partner for the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme, and we're running the session today. Just before we kick off, just some housekeeping, as we're all used to these calls by now. If you could mute your microphones and turn off your cameras when you're not speaking, that would be fantastic. Just help improve the video quality for everyone involved. We are taking questions throughout the session, so if you have any for our speakers, please feel free to drop them into the chat or use the Q&A function. I'll be monitoring both of those throughout the session today. So I'm delighted today to be joined by John from the North East Net Zero Hub, who are co-hosting this event with us today. We've also got Joe Cooper and Jennifer McLean, both representatives from projects that have received HNES funding as part of the demonstration phase of HNES. So really excited to hear from them. And also joined by my colleague Louise, who will be talking you through what HNES is and how you can get involved. So I will hand swiftly over to John.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Hart, and I'm the Strategic Stakeholder Manager for the North East and Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. We're delighted to be co-hosting this event today with our colleagues from the North West Hub. I'll briefly explain the concept of hubs, if we have the next slide, to those of you who may be unfamiliar with us. We are directed and funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and there are 5 of us around the UK. Obviously, the colleagues we've talked about from the North West, but also in the Midlands, the South West, and then the Greater South East, and which includes London. And the hubs were established about 4 years ago now, when government accepted that there was sometimes a bit of a gap between local areas' ability to, or say, ambitions for net zero, particularly with regards to clean heat and clean energy, and their capacity to deliver on those ambitions. So we were created as an additional resource, and we, as the North East and Yorkshire Net Zero Hub, are a collaborative partnership of the 4 quarters of Yorkshire, if you will, various mayoral combined authorities or mayoral combined authorities to be, depending on their stage in the devolution journey, and the 2 halves of the North East, the North of Tyne Combined Authority and North East LEP, and the Tees Valley Combined Authority. And what we're here to do practically, thank you, is to fill the gaps in between net zero ambition at a local level and the ability to deliver on them. It's about bringing in the additional resourcing, particularly through project managers embedded in each of those 6 areas you can see, to support local areas to develop clean energy and heat projects. A lot of the time that's about taking an idea, an asset, whether it's an industrial asset, there could be a heat network, or maybe a natural asset, there could be a sort of source of geothermal heat for another heat network through hot water. And getting it to the stage where it's investable, it's bid ready, there are financial models, and basically getting an idea from idea to inception. But also something that I'm keen to highlight we do is we're also a direct line to government. We are based within, for the most part of our staff, the Tees Valley Combined Authority, which is our accountable body. So we are of local government, but we are also directed and funded by national government. So we are a direct line to government, where if there are issues which are stopping local areas from stopping or slowing a transition to net zero on a local level, and as a source of policy interventions and best practice. And we are a genuine hub. We are there to connect local projects and local organisations to local partners who are able to support their projects. I guess I was finished by talking about next slide. That's just a number of our objectives that we have in our memorandum of understanding with government, that we're there to increase the number, quality and scale of local net zero projects being delivered across the North East and Yorkshire. But we're there to also support local areas to build net zero into other aspects of their delivery. And also in particular, 1 and 5 of those objectives are quite interlinked. Increasingly, there is an emphasis on us to get local projects to a stage where they are commercially investable. And for the most part at the moment, that means raising awareness of the opportunities and benefits of local net zero investment. But if we move to the final slide, we have some really great track records as well. If people are looking for support in developing their projects with supporting heat network projects, particularly through our local capacity support through our project managers in the regions, and it will be the same, I imagine, in the Northwest. So this you here see now, the very impressive building is the Gateshead Energy Centre, which is a major project, obviously on the south of the Tyne, if you're familiar with the region, which we helps support additional funding to expand its delivery. It's the largest mine water pumping system, we believe, in the UK, and it's currently heating around 1,200 homes, but also major icons of the Gateshead Quayside, such as the Baltic Art Gallery and the Sage Music Centre, and also Gateshead International Athletics Stadium, home of Gateshead Football Club, are all now receiving power from this water-powered heat source. Also, a couple of projects out towards Durham, utilising former mine infrastructure for community heat projects, particularly one in Hordern, which may have interest to people looking out there, which we have funded a feasibility study to take it to the next level of development. And finally, something I want to finish on, I will just pop a link to it in the chat when I finish speaking. We also funded a major research project by the British Geological Survey through the North East Local Enterprise Partnership, which was published just yesterday, into unlocking geothermal at scale in the UK. If I could just skip back through my notes, that estimated that there is a 200 to 300 tetrawatt hours per year of heat needed in the UK. There's potential in UK geothermal resources to supply 500,000. Not all of it will be viable, but that's the scale of the challenge. 50% of local authorities, that study says, have viable geothermal projects underneath them, and there's some potential of about 100 gigawatts for a standard project output. And it's also very much important because obviously there's a huge overlap in the skills needed to develop geothermal in the UK with current skills in the oil and gas extraction industry as part of a just transmission. So I shall now hand back to Gemserv. Thank you very much once again for putting on this event today, and to say in the Northwest and Northeastern Yorkshire hubs, we are delighted to host it.
Thanks, John, and I'd recommend definitely giving that report a read. I was reading through it earlier today. Really, really interesting. So, Louise, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you, John, for hosting this session today. So apologies to people that have joined one of these sort of sessions before. You may have seen these slides before, but for those of you that are new to HNES, I work for Gemserv. We are the scheme delivery manager for this project, appointed by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We've teamed up with 3 organisations. So we're working with Ramboll, who are our technical partners, and they're involved in assessing the applications that we receive. We worked together on the demonstrator back in 2021-22. And then for HNES now, we've also brought in Turner and Townsend, who are providing pre-application support, which Sam will talk about later on, and LuxNova as well, who can provide some legal support if needs be. So that's our delivery partner team. So what is HNES? What are we all about? So it's the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme, and we have 3 aims for the scheme. One is to reduce the carbon emissions of our heat networks by making them more efficient. Second one is reducing customer detriment to improve consumer confidence. And part of the reason for this is that as part of the Committee on Climate Change's report, they said that heat networks need to increase from 2% or 3% of the UK's heat demand at the moment to about 18 to 20% by 2050, which means we need to obviously be building a lot more heat networks. And we want to make sure that the people that are on existing heat networks are having a good experience. People are positive about heat networks and really see the value that they can bring. So we're looking at improving existing heat networks to give the existing customers that kind of confidence that they are a good source of heat. And finally, the third one is helping to prepare for sector regulation and technical standards. So Ofgem has been appointed as the regulator, and technical standards are being developed currently that all heat networks will need to be or need to meet. So we want to make sure that the existing level of performance, I guess, within heat networks is being improved ahead of those technical standards being issued. Okay, so in terms of the funding, so HNES is a grant funding scheme. We have two pots of funding. We have revenue grants and capital grants. So revenue grants are basically for projects or heat networks that know that they don't have a particularly well performing heat network, but they don't necessarily know why. And so the revenue grant is a full funding for an external third party to come in and undertake an optimization study. So have a look at your heat network, understand how it's performing currently, and then provide you with a report that has a list of recommendations that can be undertaken that are fully funded or fully costed, sorry, so that you can see how much will it cost to implement these measures, what would the payback be, what will the benefits be from reductions in energy use, in carbon savings, so that you can then use that as a basis for then undertaking capital works. So we have up to £2 million of funding across this financial year and next financial year for revenue grants. And then for the capital grants, this is part funding, so up to but not including 50%, and I can't stress that enough. If you submit an application asking for 50% or more, we will immediately come back to you and ask you to lower your grant ask. So please, if you're submitting an application for a capital fund, don't request more than or 50% or more. And this is essentially for to actually install some measures that will actually improve the heat network's performance. And for that, we have up to £30 million across this financial year and next financial year. So you can have funding across both financial years if you want to, but if you're allocated funding within a particular financial year, it must be spent within that financial year. So if it gets delayed or you can't transfer your funding across the different financial years. So it's important that you apply for the funding you want to spend within the particular financial year. And it's important to say we do still have funding available for this financial year. So I think it's the next slide. Oh no, it's the slide after that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But yeah, we have completed our first 3 funding rounds now in terms of the third round closed at the beginning of the month. So we're working our way through those applications and the assessment process. We have awarded funding to the round 1 projects, but we're now just going through the process of getting documents signed and things like that. So announcements will be made shortly on that. But there is still funding available for both, particularly for capital projects in this financial year. So if you do have a project that you want to complete before the end of March, please don't feel that there isn't it's too late to apply. We definitely still have funding available. So yeah, we're interested to hear from you. So in terms of who can apply, we support both district and communal heating systems, and we're supporting heat networks that are both in England and Wales. Organisations it ranges public, private, third sector organisations, hospitals, universities, housing associations, local authorities, all the kind of broad spectrum of organisations. But what we need is the applicant to be the person or the organisation who either owns or operates the heat network. So they must have authority to sign off on investment decisions for the heat network. So particularly from a revenue perspective, if you've already appointed a consultant to undertake your optimization study, your consultant can't apply on your behalf. Well, they can help you in terms of completing your application form, but the named applicant must be the organisation who owns or operates the heat network. The consultant can't apply on your behalf, and that's because the funding needs to be issued to the heat network operator, and then the operator pays the contractors or the consultants. Not we can't pay the consultants directly. So yeah, please make sure that the owner is, or the applicant is, the heat network owner or operator. So as I've said, we're having 8 funding rounds. The first 3 have closed and are in various stages of assessment. For those of you that have seen this slide before, you may notice that a couple of the dates have changed. So this is going to be announced formally this week, but you guys get this hot off the press. So we've shifted the round 4 and round 5 dates backwards. So previously they were the end of August and the middle of October. The main reason for that is just because end of August, I think it was the bank holiday weekend, people aren't necessarily around to complete applications. So we thought to give people a bit more time, sort of 3 weeks into September, people then have some time to actually complete applications and submit them into us. So if you are looking to submit in round 4, please note there's I think it's about 3 or 4 week extension now on that. So you now have until Friday, the 22nd of September to submit your applications. And then for round 5, it will be the 10th of November. And then, yeah, we've got 3 other funding rounds after that, sort of next year. In terms of what's eligible, so we will touch on the capital ones first, I think. So we do have a guidance for applicants document, which I think Sam, if she hasn't already, can put a link to in the chat. And that goes into a lot more detail about what HNES is and the application process and eligibility and all that kind of thing. But so I don't want to go into this in too much detail here now because we don't have time. But funding is available across the sort of whole length of the heat network, from the energy centre through to the primary secondary distribution network, the tertiary network, and also in some cases some metering. But I wanted to touch on what's ineligible. So if you've already undertaken work prior to HNES funding being awarded, this wouldn't be eligible because that work's already been completed or started. Any costs that aren't related to the heat network infrastructure, so we're not funding improvements to building fabric, for example. Any costs relating to engagement activities, so again, we're not funding stakeholder management. And then specifically within 3 of the categories, the energy centre plant room, so we wouldn't be funding costs for replacement of a primary heat generation source. Now, if you're looking at replacing a heat source from, say, for example, a gas boiler to a more efficient, like lower carbon generation source, then in England, you have the Green Heat Network Fund available. So we'd recommend you speak with them and look to see if you could be funded through that route, but that's not funded through HNES. For tertiary systems, radiators replacing heat emitters within buildings are not covered. And finally, for metering, anything that's required under the heat network metering and billing regulations, so anything that's a legal requirement from metering, that wouldn't be covered. But if you wanted to go above and beyond those legal requirements, so for example, putting in additional sub-metering, then there is funding available for that type of metering. And then on the next slide, I think we've got revenue grants. So a revenue grant essentially is to provide, like I say, an external third party to come in and have a look at your heat network and provide an optimisation study. So within the guidance for applicants document that I mentioned before, we have Annex A, which provides an outline specification of what an optimisation study should look like and what sort of the elements we would expect to find within that. So that's something that it would be useful as heat network operators to be aware of, but particularly for your consultants to be aware of as well, because that's the kind of outputs that we're looking for. And in terms of ineligible costs, any work that's already been commissioned or incurred before the application wouldn't be funded. Any project management of your third-party organisation, any secondment, anything like that wouldn't be funded. And construction, operation and maintenance of a heat network. So construction, we're not within HNES entirely. We're not funding the building of new heat networks. Again, within England, that's covered by GHNF. Any kind of improvements or actual sort of upgrades to the heat network would be covered under the capital fund for HNES, not revenue. And I think I've got one more slide. Yes. So just one final point on monitoring and reporting. So if you are successful in receiving HNES funding, one of the conditions of this funding is that you will submit monitoring and reporting returns. So these are really, really important. They help us to understand that whether HNES is meeting our aims and objectives that I talked about before. They also help us to track how projects are progressing. So and whether the grant funding will be spent within the financial years that we have. And they're also really, really helpful for building business cases for future funding. So for example, in the demonstrator, the M&R returns that we'd received were then used to build the business case for this scheme. So yeah, it's really, really important, and like I say, it's a condition of funding to complete these. From a revenue perspective, it's required from the grant award until the sign off of the optimisation study. So once your optimisation study is completed, you'll submit that through to us, and we'll say whether we approve it or not, and then the funding can be released. Monthly returns are looking at covering how your project is progressing, any risks and issues that have arisen, and a sort of forecast look at budget drawdown. And then the final return, you have to provide an overview of your optimisation study output. So there's an extra tab that only needs to be completed right at the end, which just gives us an overview of what's recommended in your optimisation study. And then for the capital side, again, they're required from the grant awards, and then for until 24 months after the commissioning date. So we want to make sure we have 2 full heating cycles once all the measures have been installed, so we can check that the targeted benefits or what you've said you'll achieve from implementing your measures have actually been realised. Again, on a monthly basis, it's the same. We want updates on how your project is progressing, risks and issues, and how you're planning on drawing down your budget. And on a quarterly basis, we want to see the progress against the benefits and the KPIs that you put in your application form. So within your application form, there's a tab called baseline and targets. And so we want to check how you're progressing against the targets that you set in your application form and whether you're on track to meet those. And that's provided every 3 months. Okay, I think that's everything from me. And I'm sure you're now much more interested in hearing about all the projects that have received funding in the demonstrator. So I'll hand over to the Keel.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name's Joe. I'm the general manager of a site in Liverpool called the Keel. And I'm employed by the operating company, so essentially the landlord of the site. So I've just been asked to put together a few slides for everyone just to kind of document our journey through the round 1 of funding for the optimisation studies, the outcomes of that, benefits to us, and then next steps for us really. So yeah, we've got a bit of an overview, a couple of pictures of the building, so you can you get a bit of a flavour of what I'm talking about and when we come to the description and that kind of thing. And then what we found through the HNES funding, which has been incredibly helpful to us. So just a bit of background on the site then. The Keel is a 240 bedroom residential block in Liverpool. As you can see from the picture, the site is quite a striking development within the city. We're situated right on the River Mersey. We've got large private grounds and we've got our own internal dock. So it actually straddled an old working dry dock. So when the area was renovated, this is one of the buildings that was constructed. It's not purpose-built residential. It was built in 1993 and it was originally the HM Revenue and Customs Tax and Excise building in the city. This site was sold and converted to a build-to-rent scheme originally in 2015. And at the time, this was one of the first build-to-rent developments in the UK and was quite a groundbreaking scheme. So yeah, there's definitely a site where there's lessons to be learned, and as one of the kind of flagship buildings for build to rent in the UK, it's been a real good challenge to work on site since we took over. So the client bought the site 3 years ago, and we were introduced as managing agent. So that's really how long we've been involved in the site, and it's fairly clear that there is some improvements to be made. On conversion, the site was retrofitted with a district heat network with a circulation of heating and hot water available within all the apartments instantaneously on demand via a heat interface unit within each dwelling. If you just go across a couple of slides, please. Yeah, that's it. Great, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned before, it became fairly apparent that the HIUs in situ were fairly unreliable and in poor condition, making them extremely inefficient. So even with an increased maintenance schedule, which has been quite a large annual expense on site, the components in the HIUs have proved to be fairly prone to breakdowns and poor performance. So just an example of that, from April 2020 to October 2021, there was a monthly average of 14 HIU faults per month, with the worst single month seeing 85 HIU related issues being raised by residents, which is in one of the colder months. So as you can imagine, we have had our hands full with this system. So yeah, along with this, the existing plant room and pipe network has got limited controls integrated, and it runs on 8 gas-fed boilers within the plant room, which have historically almost been run on full tilt to supply the system, rather than controls integrated with them to supply on demand and the actual need. So yeah, the district heat network efficiency historically hasn't been too favourable, and the heat losses around the system have been identified in the past as a concern, as well as poor supply of heat within the apartments. So with that at the forefront of our minds, and resident satisfaction, efficiency, comfortability, we looked into the HNES scheme on recommendation and identified this could potentially be extremely helpful to improve efficiencies on site for us. Just a couple of slides just to give you a kind of idea of what the site looks like. So this is another renovation since we took over the site of our communal lounge. So like I said, it is a build to rent community. So at the heart of that is the additional services, the 24-hour concierge, co-working lounges, coffee machine, all that kind of stuff, bookable meeting rooms that you can see in this picture. And obviously you've got then the kind of baseline requirements of an efficient heating and hot water system to supply to your residents. None of this essentially means that much without your necessities on site. Just to look inside of one of the apartments as well, one of the typical apartments as well. So they are quite spacious. The heat and supply and the radiators in the apartments don't take up much of the room. So, the efficiency of those are really key, which is something that we've kind of delved into with the funding. So yeah, just an overview of the application process then for round 1 of the funding for the optimisation reports. We successfully applied for the funding via the HNES scheme to carry out an optimisation study. And the aims of the study were to improve the heat network in terms of efficiency and reduce energy costs, reliability, customer or resident satisfaction, and environmental impacts. Alongside this study, and when we started to commence the study, it became apparent that the landlord would also be installing a water source heat pump that would make use of our kind of unique location that straddles the canal and our private dock. This was to be considered during the study as well, as improved efficiencies could be achieved, bearing in mind that we had a water source heat pump incoming on site as well. The funding for the study was granted, and therefore we instructed the optimisation report, and this was carried out through site visits, installation of monitoring equipment, and using pre-recorded data that we held on site. Findings within the case study showed that there was a potential to reduce gas use. In addition to that, significant electricity savings could be achieved. The study showed that existing HIUs had several poorly performing / low efficiency / poor reliability components therefore new units could be justified, especially with the potential HNES capital funding further on in the funding rounds. New HRUs would achieve an even larger saving in line with a heat pump, as they would allow a lower flow temperature, and the return temperature for the district heating in turn would be significantly lower as well. It's found that new HRUs would reduce heating costs for residents, improving affordability and satisfaction levels, and that significant CO2 savings would meet corporate objectives and work towards decarbonisation of the site, which obviously is a big positive for conscious residents as well as the owners and the operators of the site as we work towards ESG credentials and improving those. Data collection on heat and gas meters installed was really helpful. It identified issues within the network for us to reactively respond to, and highlighted some problem areas for us to kind of jump on a day-to-day from an operational side as well. And it also showed that new HRUs, along with an installation of a heat pump and a large thermal store, would yield projected savings of £80,000 per year on utilities costs, which is obviously a massive saving that can be passed on to the residents as well. This at the time was based on gas costs of 6.67p per kilowatt hour at the time. The tariffs recently increased in line with the energy markets. It's almost it's more than doubled. So savings will now be considerably larger. How we modelled the report then. So we connected some wired heat meter data collection to 4 new data collectors for input to a software called MeterPoint. We installed a temporary heat meter on one of the pairs for the distribution pipework. That allowed us to retrieve half-hourly data collection from the gas meter that supplies the boiler. We surveyed HRUs thoroughly in 4 apartments, estimated the system efficiencies, and identified the issues reducing system efficiencies. And then we modelled the heat pump economics and CO2 savings based on the current setup and an improved setup and what that would look like. Thank you. Yeah, just some images then of a typical HRU that were within the apartments. So as you can see, for the 5 or so years from the point their site was converted into the point we took management, it looks like the water hadn't necessarily been treated correctly. The poor components, as mentioned before, in the HRUs are pretty clear there, and that is how we received all of the HRUs in the apartment. So minimal insulation, a lot of corrosion, a lot of failing components, and the layout as well was fairly problematic. You can see that white rectangular box at the bottom there, that's actually a heat meter. And on the bottom left, that circular meter there is the water meter. So even for expecting residents to take manual readings when they needed to, which we have needed to, and the staff have had to take them because of problems with the metering system, that was an issue in itself because it's obviously, not that safe to do so essentially, and not that easy to get to. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and you can see why that was identified as one of the main concerns when we carried out the optimisation report. So recommendations from the optimisation study then identified 3 immediate adjustments that could be made to increase efficiencies. These are to close bypasses at the top of the HRUs to reduce flow rates and lower the return temperatures. Reduce pump differential pressure set points. So the combined points above would save around £30 per apartment annually, or around about 7,200 per annum, which is a pretty much instantaneous saving, which was great. It also recommended to isolate boilers when they're not providing heat, but this would require a motorised isolation valve installed on each boiler and a new boiler shunt pump or inverter fitted to the current pumps. The prominent recommendation was to replace all of the existing HRUs due to their poor condition, reliability and efficiency when providing heat within the apartments. The economic case to carry out this work was significantly strengthened by the installation of a water source heat pump and potentially achieving the capital funding through HNES in the future. New HIUs would reduce/remove all heating and hot water supply issues the residents have experienced previously. An installation of new HIUs could improve metering within the site concurrently and improve data collection. A lot of the work around that would be to relocate meters outside of the units, and that would help us identify which are basically defunct, where we've got gaps in data and where we need to replace meters in the future, and give us more visibility on that, on the metering side of things. And changing from an indirect to a direct district heat network system was a recommendation as well, which would improve efficiency and reduce operating and mechanical costs year on year. So this was just a, a graph of a typical HIU performance within the apartments then. Again, using the software we call, it's called MeterPoint, and with our consultant that we've been working with, Carbon Alternatives and Meternet. What this graph essentially is showing is that the flow temperatures are fairly high, but the return temperatures aren't much different. So there's not really any delta T between the flow and the return temperature, which makes it extremely inefficient HIU in terms of extracting heat within the apartments, but also the effect that has on the boilers in the plant room as they're operating, like I said, on full tilt and consuming a lot more electricity costs than they need to be if there were some controls implemented on them. If we compare that slide to an example of a good HIU for the hot water and standby, you can see the differences quite visually there. You've got a flow temperature of 70 degrees and a return temperature of 26. So that delta T is absolutely huge, and that in turn makes the whole system far more efficient and less expensive to run. And a good HIU in terms of space heating as well. So again, you've got a high flow temperature and a much lower return temperature, so a much higher delta T, again making the system much more efficient. So comparing those graphs with a typical example of an HIU within our apartments is night and day, really. You can see the difference visually there. Excuse me. So benefits then of changing to a direct connection with the new HIUs. So the optimisation report showed us that there would be a lower HIU cost. There'd be a more efficient system operation, so higher plant efficiency and lower heat loss. A longer life for heating system components in apartments, so radiators, TRVs, and reduced maintenance for HIU and apartment heating systems, so no more leaks, no more failing components. And it would allow us to install a much simpler HIU required to enable weather compensation as well. It'd bring the district heat and flow temperature down to 55 degrees. It would allow us to lower the return temperatures, pipe temperatures, and it would give us a reliable 35 kilowatts of district hot water at 50 degrees Celsius. And the new HIUs will be fully insulated as well, as opposed to what's in situ. So standing losses would be less than 50 watts. And we'd be able to get new meters installed at the same time, which would be a separate project to this, but that would just be at the cost of the meter. And it would allow us to use the BESA HIU test as a basis to select on the basis of independently verified performance. So the optimization report as well also showed us some projected cost savings. As I mentioned before, this was based on estimated electricity costs and current gas costs at the time of the study. So gas costs have now gone up to 13p per kilowatt hour, and the electricity costs that we've achieved are actually slightly lower than that. So these efficiencies will be much higher now, and the savings will be much higher. So we'll have to remodel that. But just to show you the the data that was pulled together from the consultant, the energy cost saving compared to the existing setup, so from current gas boilers and current HIUs to a water sourced heat pump, new HIUs and a large thermal store, was estimated at the time at around £80,844 per year, which again is a significant saving. And the way the apartments are sub-meters as well, that saving, that cost saving can be passed down to the residents. So the affordability for the residents on site would increase quite significantly as well. The outcomes and next steps then. The immediate recommendations were followed up and a number of bypasses closed around the building. A proposal and full findings were sent to the landlord for plant room alterations and HRU replacements. These were accepted based on round 2 capital funding being applied for, and hopefully that will be approved in future. The commencement of the project is dependent on this being achieved. As I said, the business case and the economic case was strengthened with the funding, potential funding, and the scope of works were created for the plant room alterations to implement controls on the boilers, pumps and water source heat pump. Efficiencies will be realised with weather compensated controls and other measures, but that's one key example. So dependent on the temperature external to the building and the need for the hot water, the temperature produced by the heat pump and distributed around the site will be higher or lower, depending on the needs. We provided costings and a scope of works that are implemented for a site-wide HRU replacement. And next step would be to remodel the cost savings based on the new tariff prices that we've recently gone on to. Since that point, we've applied for the capital funding from HNES, and we're hopeful that we can achieve this. And data collection from the initial study has allowed us to better understand the failings within the system. And already we've achieved improved efficiencies within the system in each apartment. So overall, the data that we've been able to collect through the optimisation study and the HNES funding has been invaluable to us, really, as a managing agent and a landlord, for knowledge when planning future projects and site management contracts as well. So I know the landlord may look to acquire a few more buildings or mobilise some more buildings with a district heat network, and it gives us a really good framework to work towards and what kind of parameters we need to look out for to improve efficiencies in future sites as well. So yeah, the optimisation study in conclusion has been a real big help to us.
Fantastic, thanks Joe, really useful. Just handing over to Jennifer now, and then we'll take some questions, so please do send them through. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'd like to introduce myself as Jennifer McLean. I'm the Major Works Project Manager for Notting Hill Genesis, and I'm very happy to speak to you about one of the capital works projects that we carried out as part of HNES match funding in 22-23. Next slide, please. Okay, so we were actually lucky enough to actually be awarded capital funding from HNES for 4 sites, Thomas Road, Mildmay Estate, Grange Walk and Windmill Park. Essentially, most of this project involved some aspects of HRU replacement or HRU recommissioning, as well as major plant and network upgrades. For today's presentation, I'd like to just focus on the Mildmay project. So next slide, please. Okay, so just a little bit of information about Mildmay Estate. So it's located in East London, in Shoreditch. It was built in 2014 and is a mixed tenure of leasehold, private, rented and general needs units across 139 units. Essentially, it's a district network it had 5 connected substations located with individual blocks across the site. And also, the heat network was connected to 3 commercial units, one being a large hospital called Mildmay Mission Hospital, and another being a church, Mildmay Tabernacle Church, and also a small cafe. We actually had involvement from Fairheat, who are our heat consultants, back in 2017-18, who produced an optimisation report to us following survey work that they did on that site. Next slide, please. So this is just an aerial shot of what Mildmay Estate looks like. Just here at the back is the hospital. And just over here on the left-hand side, just right in the corner, is the church environment, and you actually can't see the cafe from here, so I'll skip that bit. Next slide, please. So we knew obviously that we were having issues with the network prior to the availability of HNES funding, hence the fact that we'd commissioned Fair Heat, our consultants, to do a report on what the problems were and how we could potentially resolve them going forward. So one of the main issues that we were experiencing was regular unplanned outages, and this included bellows popping all over the site, pipework splitting, and local pressurization units failing. The level of heat efficiency across the plant was really very low, around 21% pre-works. And the buildings were suffering from overheating in communal areas due to bypassing risers. Also, there was a block E called Appel Court, which was specifically poorly performing. Also, we had inadequate pipework insulation that didn't meet current guidelines, and obviously some of that insulation was actually missing across the network. The water quality was identified by Fair Heat as a particular source of problematic functioning of the network, as well as obviously we had a high cost of heat due to all that bypassing and due to all that overheating. And most importantly, we had a group of very dissatisfied residents, not only our general needs and private tenants, but also our commercial customers. Obviously, Mildmay Hospital, in terms of the type of clientele and inpatient care that they needed to deliver, it was absolutely critical that they could have a reliable and high-performing network that they could rely on, so that they could deliver heat and hot water to their patients. So before HNES funding, we had identified that within the main plant room, there were too many heat pumps, leading to inefficiencies in terms of energy consumption. We had approximately 8 in the main plant room, as well as obviously the pumps within the substations. So we actually were able to identify that we could at least halve the number of pumps and therefore dramatically reduce the electricity consumption from that site. There's also an image of the burst bellows causing heat network outages. A lot of these bellows were in the 5 substations that I referred to earlier. So that was also a key area for service failure and service outage. Okay. And just here we have an image of one of the substations and also the overside pipe work that we were dealing with. And here's an image of the low loss header pipe work that we actually removed from here to there. Okay. So obviously we were successful in our application for HNES funding as part of the demonstration package, and Fair Heat, our consultants, set out a package of works for us, which included replacing HIUs within Block E, that was 61 units in total, reservicing and recommissioning all the other HIUs, and rebalancing the radiators to ensure that we had optimum space heating. We also installed Guru in all homes and blocks so we could monitor the network performance across the whole site. And we reduced the number of heat pumps and pipe sizes, as I mentioned earlier. The 5 substations that were connected to the blocks are now completely gone. And we've got a picture of that later. The other parts of the package was to remove the top of riser bypasses and to enhance the insulation to the pipework to current regs, as well as fitting an X-Pot side stream filter and Hevershaw water monitoring unit. Next slide, please. Okay, so after HNES funding, so here's an image of a high-performing, non-bypassing heat interface unit that was installed, one of the 61 that were installed on that site. On the right-hand side is the image of the Hevershaw water quality device, which gives us remote notifications of any issues in relation to the water quality and the chemical components so that we can respond to that. Next slide, please. And this is the former substation, or one of them, with all the pipework removed, and just an image of the upgraded BMS system controls. So that was also a vital part of the scope of works, that we upgrade the BMS system. Okay, so in terms of the cost of the HNES improvement works, we originally estimated the cost to be in the region of 620k. We got match funding from HNES in the amount of 309,000. The final cost of the works came in slightly over budget at 716k. Primarily, those additional costs related to our decision to add to the scope in terms of investing in that remote monitoring equipment on site, i.e. the Heathershore and some further BMS upgrades. And also, I think we initially underestimated the amount of spare parts that would be required to support the HIU servicing. Some of the HIUs were actually in a poorer state than we originally expected, so that did spike up the costs a little bit. Okay, so the impact of HNS and the value that this funding's had to us and to our residents. So obviously it's really still very early days in terms of performance analysis, because the works weren't completely finished until February this year. However, the bulk of the works were actually completed up to October 22. So we've compared the gas consumption for the period October 22 to April 23 in relation to the same period the previous year. And we've been able to demonstrate through, obviously, copy invoices, etc., that gas consumption has actually decreased by 32%, so a decrease of 422,000 kilowatts of energy there. So that equates to a cost saving of around 27k, based on a price of 6.6 pence per kilowatt, and a carbon emission saving of 119 tonnes. Also, that network efficiency that I talked about earlier, originally being around 21% pre-works, we're now measuring network efficiency as 77% for May 23. So that just kind of gives a really clear impression of just how successful those works have been. Obviously, we do have the occasional unplanned plant outage. But because we have that BMS monitoring, we have the remote watering data and pinpoint data provided by the Guru systems, our contractors are generally already on site before actually residents notice that there has been a hiccup with the plant and network. So generally, kind of in terms of comparing service levels before and after, often it was taking 24 to 36 hours to reinstate heating and hot water services to residents pre the works. Obviously, with the enhanced upgrades and the enhanced availability of remote data, generally it's taking around 1 to 2 hours to reinstate supply. So a huge difference in terms of resident disruption to residents. Operating flow temperatures originally were at 77, and they've reduced to 65 degrees Celsius, and bulk meter return temperatures have gone down from 68 degrees to 40 degrees Celsius. And we have a portal of information and data on water quality, which shows that there has been significant improvement in water quality at that site. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a couple of lessons learned for any of you who are thinking about bidding for HNES projects. As you may already know, resident engagement is the key in terms of accessing all the occupied properties, because it is the biggest obstacle to making progress with your project in a timely manner. I think there's no magic solution to resident engagement. I think for us it was just a lot of persistence and a lot of negotiation and working with our housing teams and estate staff on the ground, and really trying to explain to residents how actually it's not just going to benefit them in terms of having their HIU replaced, but it's also going to affect, you know, and improve the whole heating network, and just explaining how interconnected the HIUs are, and how one bypassing HIU can significantly affect the other. So obviously we also had a lot of pipework modifications to do. Prefabrication was really important to reduce the amount of time on site, and obviously to reduce the need to do hot works on site, therefore you know, reducing any health and safety risks. HIUs can be pre-wired, pre-commissioned, and we were definitely making sure that we have all our HIUs now pre-fitted with gurus, so that actually reduces installation time within the property. And also piloting helps iron out any teething issues, and also helps in terms of obtaining accurate costs. That is my last slide. So yeah. Over to you, Gemserv. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's really great to see the real life impact that the projects are having, and some really substantial savings there. So well done to you and the team.
Thank you.
We have a few questions which I wanted to run through before I touch on some of the application support that we can offer. So the first one, Joe's for you. Did you speak to the council or to Peel, who carried out some HNDU studies nearby? And there's obviously the Peel heat network not too far away from your site. Were there any sort of possibilities of joining that up and having those conversations?
Yeah, there were conversations between the landlord and us as managing agent. So prior to us taking instruction of the site, the water source heat pump was already pre-planned, and we worked with a few consultants who have installed a number of equipment on site in past before we took management, such as solar panels, and they've had those conversations and consultation with local business and local council on their thoughts. I know there are wider plans to link a whole system up to a heat network. I don't think that was being accelerated or was appropriate for us at the time, so we kind of installed that privately through our consultants. So, but there were conversations had. I weren't privy to them at the time. I think it was between our consultants and the landlord and the local council. So
great. Yeah, I guess just always useful to be aware of what's going on around the site, and if there are options to collaborate, then exploiting those. So yeah, sounds great. Question for both of you. How did you go about identifying suitable consultants? So potentially concerns around consultants being incentivized to recommend work because they could potentially deliver that at a later date. So how did you go about speaking to various consultants and finding the right ones for you?
I think for NHG, we obviously had a long-standing relationship with Fair Heat as our preferred heating contractor, but of course we also do have alternative heating contractors that we work with, and obviously it's always useful to get a second opinion when it comes to some of the recommendations that are made, obviously. So yeah, I think just do your research, and obviously, you know, use people that you know and have previously been recommended to you.
yeah, I'd say for us, we've got quite a good relationship with a meter and consultant and engineer that used to work for our billing provider, essentially. So he formed his own company. I spoke to him and he gave me a few suggestions, and yeah, as touched upon just then, I kind of had to do my own research. I had initial conversations with a few of them. I landed on a consultant that after some quite lengthy conversations, I realised he's very knowledgeable. He'd written like a best practice guide on heat networks, so that was a good start. And he would always look. He was very upfront and honest and say, you know, I always look for efficiencies where we can the HRU replacement that was suggested would be the last resort. But obviously we were aware of the condition of the units in situ, and based on the report, that was unfortunately his recommendation. So I think from his side of things, his involvement was drawing up the report. But after that, it's kind of us getting a scope of work produced and then going out to tender to some mechanical engineers. So he's nothing to do with that piece. So his, you know, how much money, how much revenue he's going to generate through this scheme isn't huge in comparison to, you know, a mechanical contractor that we're going to employ to potentially carry out any capital improvements. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we quite often get asked to recommend consultants, but I think from what both of you are saying there, it's quite obvious that there's research that needs to go on from an individual applicant perspective, and there's lots of consultants out there that can support. So if anyone wants to speak to some of the funded projects about their experiences, then feel free to reach out and see if you can get recommendations that way. In regards to stakeholder engagement, are there any learnings that either of you would share? Best practice hints and tips?
I think I'd say that actually try many different approaches for engagement. You'd be surprised at what approach might work for one resident won't work for another, and vice versa. So I had a particular resident on one of our other schemes at Thomas Road. There was a huge water flow going through a unit. It was, you know, it was really kind of a key draw on consumption for that whole site. And initially, she just refused to accept that her HRU was problematic. She had her own supply of heating and hot water. She didn't understand why we needed access to do this work to her property. And actually, the final thing that convinced her was me actually showing her the Guru pinpoint data that showed the amount and volume of water that was going through her system, and to explain actually the impact in terms of her heating costs and her energy consumption. So that actually worked. So just keep trying lots of different approaches is my recommendation.
Right, thanks, Jo. Any tips from you?
Yeah, no, I would say, as always, kind of communication's key, really. So we, as I mentioned before, we took management of the site around about 3 years ago. So as part of that, there's been a number of projects that we've carried out. Some might not be visible to the residents. It might not be aesthetic. It might be an improvement of functionality of the building or new technologies you've implemented. So we pulled together, when we knew this was a possibility, we pulled together a full communication booklet, just describing what what projects we'd already undertaken, what the outcomes of that were, and any upcoming projects. So obviously the optimisation report, the water source heat pump, that all formed part of the upcoming projects. And we were just really clear and concise on what benefits that would bring, potential utility savings, you know, lower carbon emissions, you know, it's good for your carbon footprint, all that kind of thing. We've got a number of conscientious residents, I think, which is kind of typical of the clientele that you get in the build to rent development nowadays. It's a particular kind of demographic that you achieve. So that would be it. And then obviously, like Jennifer touched upon, then is explaining if there is a particular apartment that there's an issue, explaining what the issue is, but making sure it comes from yourselves as a management team or a resident manager rather than the contractor within the apartment. So that's something that we've been really clear on, is setting those boundaries, because there's a lot of information that's open to misinterpretation that comes from a contractor directly to a resident if they're in their apartment. So yeah, really just setting those boundaries and making sure as a managing agent that communication piece comes from yourselves and not directly from a contractor.
Great, thank you both. We are hitting up against, or we've just passed our end point today. I know there are a few additional questions. It'd be great, Jo and Jennifer, if you could take a look at them and perhaps respond in the chat, that would be great. Just before we finish up, I just wanted to run through the pre-application support that we can provide to you if you're considering a HNES application. So we have a team of relationship managers and application support managers that can help you through the guidance and answer any questions that you have. So the primary email address for you to contact us with any questions is hnes@gemserv.com. If you would like a one-to-one meeting with our relationship managers to discuss your application in detail, so these are for individuals that are considering an application in the next couple of funding rounds, then you can contact hnes.support@gemserv.com and request that one-to-one. So any general inquiries, send it through to the main inbox. But if you'd like a more detailed discussion, then please do contact the Turner and Townsend team. The application guidance is available on the gov.uk website that I've sent through to you. As you can see on screen, we can have a look through your application form before you submit it to us and identify any bits that don't look like they're filled in quite right before you submit. If you are at any point unsuccessful with your application, you'll get detailed feedback and you'll be able to respond to resubmit in a later round. So just leave you with our contact information. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will share the recording with you and the slides later on this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.